When we talk about AI, we usually picture these super smart, totally objective machines, right? Pure logic. But the truth is, AI can be just as biased as we are. And it's not because it's evil or anything, it's because it learns from us. And that means it learns all our flaws, our messy history, the whole 9 yards. And look, this isn't some sci-fi problem we're talking about. This quote, it's from a real study on software that's actually been used in US courts. It was designed to predict if someone was likely to commit another crime. I mean, the stakes don't get much higher than that, right? This is where AI bias stops being a theory and starts having these huge, life-changing impacts on real people. So what is algorithmic bias, really? Well, think of it this way. An AI system is basically a mirror. It reflects whatever it's shown. And if the data we show it is full of our own hidden biases, well, that's what it's going to reflect back. The key thing to remember is the AI isn't trying to be unfair. Its job is just to find patterns. But if the patterns in our data are shaped by decades of inequality, the AI is going to learn those patterns. And sometimes it can make them even worse. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by figuring out where this bias even comes from. Then we'll zoom in on a really common problem called the self-selection trap. And finally, we'll look at how people are trying to fix this whole mess. Okay, let's get to the root of the problem. This bias, it doesn't just pop up out of nowhere in the algorithm's code. Nope, it all starts with the fuel for AI, the data. And what you're about to see is that even the data we think is top-notch is actually pretty flawed. Case in point, let's take a look at something called the General Social Survey, the GSS. I mean, this thing is considered the gold standard in social science research. It's been running for about 50 years, trying to get a perfect snapshot of the US. But even this gold standard has some serious cracks in it. And this is where it gets really interesting. Check out all the blind spots. The GSS only talks to adults living in regular houses. So what about college students in dorms, soldiers on military bases, people in prison? They're just not there. For a long time, you had to speak English to even be included. And now fewer and fewer people are even responding. Every single one of these little issues is a piece of the puzzle that's missing, a distortion that an AI could just gobble up and treat as the absolute truth. Okay, so that's the big picture, right? Flaws in how we collect massive data sets. But how does this happen on a smaller scale? Like, how do we, just by living our lives, accidentally create biased data without even knowing it? Well, that brings us to this classic problem that researchers are always bumping into. It's called the self-selection trap, and it is the perfect example of how our own choices can quietly poison a data set. So what is it? Basically, this kind of bias happens when the people in your study chose to be in your study. Just think about it for a second. The fact that someone volunteers for something, a survey, a product trial, whatever, already makes them different from people who don't volunteer. And boom, right there, your sample is skewed. Okay, here's a super simple example to make this crystal clear. Picture a company with a new test prep course. Who's going to sign up? Probably the most motivated, ambitious students, right? The ones who really want to ace that test. So they take the course, they get amazing scores, and the company is like, see, our course is incredible. But here's the million-dollar question. Were those students going to get great scores anyway just because they were so motivated? We have no way of knowing. An AI looking at this data would just see took course, got high score, and might think the course is some kind of magic bullet, completely missing the real story. And that right there is a perfect, simple example of how our own behaviors create these hidden biases. This kind of thing is everywhere. Think about who decides to leave a 5-star review on Amazon, or who bothers to fill out a customer's satisfaction survey. The AI doesn't see any of that context. It just sees the data, flaws and all, and learns from it. Okay, so I know this might sound a little doom and gloom, but here's the good news. Researchers aren't just sitting around. They are actively fighting back. You could almost call it a 3-front war against AI bias. So they've basically come up with 3 main battle plans. And I love this analogy. Think of it like you're cooking a meal. First, there's pre-processing. That's like prepping your ingredients, washing the vegetables, trimming the fat before you even start cooking. Then you've got in-processing. This is like changing the recipe as you're cooking to make sure it comes out right. And finally, there's post-processing. That's like tasting the dish at the very end and adding a little salt or pepper to perfect it. So let's look at that first one, pre-processing. This is all about fixing the data before the AI even gets its hands on it. The most common techniques involve either changing the data's representation, which is a fancy way of saying you might hide certain information that could cause bias, like someone's race, or using sampling techniques. That can mean you intentionally grab more data from underrepresented groups to make sure their perspective gets counted fairly. All right, on to strategy number 2, in processing. This is where you actually change the rules of the game while the AI is learning. It's like you're teaching it with specific guardrails. The most popular approaches are adding constraints. Think of these as hard and fast rules, like you are not allowed to be more than X% different in your outcomes for these two groups. Or they use something called regularization, which is kind of like a penalty. Every time the AI starts to make a biased choice, it gets a little slap on the wrist, which teaches it to avoid doing that in the future. And that brings us to the final step, post-processing. This happens after the AI is all trained up and making decisions. It's basically like having a human editor come in and review the AI's work. They might change the model's output directly, or they might adjust something called the classifier threshold. Imagine an AI is deciding who gets a loan. Post-processing might mean saying, okay, for this historically disadvantaged group, we're going to slightly lower the credit score needed for approval, just to make sure the final outcomes are balanced. So out of these 3 strategies, where is everyone focusing their energy? Well, the numbers tell a pretty clear story. In processing, fixing the learning process itself is the runaway winner, and that tells you something really important. The experts believe it's way better to build fairness into the AI from the very beginning rather than trying to patch up its mistakes at the end. All right, let's pull all this together. What have we learned? 1, AI bias is really just a mirror, showing us the flaws in our own data. 2, even our best attempts at collecting data have huge blind spots. 3, our own behavior, through things like self-selection, can totally warp a dataset. And 4, the really hopeful part, researchers are on the case, fighting this battle on all 3 fronts, before, during, and after the AI is trained. And this all leads to one final really big question. We basically created AI on our own image, and surprise, surprise, it inherited our biases. But now, as these systems are making more and more critical decisions in our world, about who gets a job, who gets a loan, even about our health, the real challenge isn't just about code, it's about us. Can we actually teach our own creation to be better than we are, to be fairer? That's the real test.